We need to seek data points beyond the normal disposition of data. Oftentimes, data points most commonly tracked or highlighted do not fully tell the stories or needs of students most likely at the margins. Hi, my name is Crystal Shu. I'm a senior design principal here at Education Element. And in this section, I'll be sharing 3 things. 1, how missing data points can help leaders uncover and understand the immunity towards change of a particular challenge. 2, how data points should go beyond telling us if the student was successful or not, but truly uncover the why behind that. A data which will help fight a data-rich, information-poor culture. And finally, there are missing data points in data discussions, such as a student's skills acquisition, a student's identity development, demographic information beyond the standard groups, and finally, a student's sense of belonging and connectiveness to the school culture or adults. This section aligns with the holistic element of Education Element's essential elements of data culture. Over the last 10 months, we've gotten 3 top questions from our district partners. 1, how do we help get our students more engaged in this virtual, hybrid, concurrent learning environment? 2, how can we improve our parent engagement and/or community or parent partnership? And 3, how do we start to address the learning gaps or potential unmet learning needs of students as a result of the last 10 months? All 3 questions have one thing in common, and that the system that it's been designed has worked for some, but not others. Leaders may be having a really hard time uncovering how to fix this issue or this challenge because of missing data points or untracked data points that truly help uncover why this isn't working. For the sake of this video, we're going to focus on unpacking the learning experience. Student engagement has been measured, tracked, analyzed from a perspective around who shows up or who interacts and who doesn't, but not necessarily around the why people will choose not to interact or engage. The data that we do commonly have is around presence, such as attendance, minutes on a program, work submission, grades, the amount of questions asked, or even assessments. But what data are classrooms, schools, and districts looking at, tracking beyond the presence and truly understanding why not? Why are people or students not interacting? Do you know the number of students or percentage of students that do not feel like it is safe to make mistakes? Therefore, in a virtual setting, it's easier to self-protect by not making mistakes or interacting. Do you know that percentage? Do you know if students view the amount of work that they're getting as more than before and without a clear purpose or relevancy, you don't understand why the work is being assigned? Common data conversations around engagement may start with data points that are based on presence. It might be around the attendance, the grades, the minutes. However, that will just answer the question of who's interacting and who's not, and not necessarily getting to why and how to change it. And so when this question is presented of, well, how do we change engagement, or how do we get students to interact a little bit more? Those decisions and answers are solely then based on highly susceptible bias and assumptions of individuals, in this case, most commonly adults. Those power dynamics, those barriers to change may be around a privileged perspective, a value judgment of what is important, bias, a fixed mindset, and many others. Once you understand the group of data that you have around students that are not engaged, right? So you have your presence data. The second step you can take to understand the why is start breaking that group down into smaller groups to understand more intricately the reasons why they may not be as fully engaged. By doing this, it will allow you to pause and check biases or assumptions that people may hold about a certain subset of students and/or their families. Researchers have really shown some of the biggest missing pieces in education is the ability to break down our student data beyond the standard 5 demographics into aspects of such as multiracial and/or even ethnicity. The second thing you can be doing with it is about thinking about the intersectionality of the race dynamic with other aspects of the family. So understanding if they are a single parent household, understanding their economic needs, understanding their housing mobility, those intersectionalities between the different aspects of the families and students have shown to really impact how students engage with learning. So when you're looking at engagement levels, also don't even just think about identity, think about the time of day, right? If you're looking at students who are not present in an active way? Is it during certain subset of days? Is it during certain subset of time? How may that be impacted by outside forces? We know that this may not be the first you've heard, but we have to say it because a part of missing data points is understanding that not all lack of engagement is a result of the same barrier or challenge. Therefore, the solutions will not just be a one-size-fits-all solution or a single action that will cause a change. This is reminded of two recent news articles circulating around single parents, students in lower grades, and the engagement or the lack of engagement they have with school. In one story, it was about a single mother with a kindergarten student in New Jersey, and she shared how her student actually had not been attending school because she was faced with the choice of going to work and putting her child in a daycare facility that will not support logging on to synchronous learning, by putting food on the table, or making sure her student is attending school during school hours, but not have a job or the income necessarily to provide. Another story is of a single parent with a student in first grade, and it talked about her learning experience in a virtual setting, being at first super excited to engage and super excited to see her teachers and friends. But after a period of time, she slowly started withdrawing from the learning environment. And her mom was sharing how it was because, one, she may not feel heard, right? The time that it takes for her to unmute is a lot slower than students in the class. So she feels like she's never being able to be first, or the amount of time that she's given to process a question or thought, she couldn't actually formulate. So over time, she started withdrawing from the class. Both have levels of similarity. Both have the outcomes that are similar, which is disengagement, but the reasons for it is very different. These two stories really helped highlight how the student learning experience is not a single faceted data point. It's not just based on work submission. It's not just based on showing their face on Zoom. And it's not just based on attendance, or in our case, we call it the presence data point. It is so much more than that. And as leaders, we have to seek to understand the why. And that why cannot be because of adult understanding. An assistant superintendent of a big district here in Georgia once said in a recent reflection, she's like, we used to bring teachers to the table to be the voice of students, assuming that teachers are able to fully represent the voice of students. However, in true equitable inclusion, we need to rethink that process. And so in true understanding of student engagement, ask yourself as a district and as a school, how are you making sure you're collecting the missing data pieces in the right frequency and from the right places? How are you triangulating the data points to ensure that you're able to tell not just a no, yes answer, but really help to understand the why? And how are you ensuring that you're not measuring engagement from a perception of compliance, but more from a perception of understanding the why? These are all aspects we ask when we are faced with the question of how do we improve our engagement? When we work with schools and districts around their student engagement, we seek to collect missing data pieces to help inform the conversation. And there are 7 areas that we sort of collect information around. So we'll share the 7 areas, and we'll share 2 of the example questions that fall under each of the areas. So area 1 is around the student social emotional needs and reflections. And this, we asked about the frequency of different feelings, as well as the student perception of flexibility and understanding of those around them. The second area that we collect information is around student learning environment. And this, we seek to understand their perception of their interactions with the teachers, as well as their peers and friends. We also seek to understand their ability and ease to access resources and assignment and understanding of those tasks. The third area is around, we call it engagement effort task. We seek to understand how much effort they're putting in compared to before, their perception of the ease and difficulty of that effort. We also collect information on how hard it is for them to focus right now. The fourth area is around cultural awareness, identity, and action. And this section, we collect information of their perception of adults around themselves. We also collect information on if they feel celebrated and seen for their success, their culture, and their individualism. The fifth category, we call it questions about you. And this is sort of where we go beyond the standard demographic questions. We ask questions about their role in self-responsibility and self-care. We asked around their ability to have outside commitments and also aspects of maybe housing stability. The sixth area is about learning styles. And this is really about understanding their unique learning needs, what they view as success, and if they feel safe making mistakes in the learning environment. And the final category, category 7, is around learning preference. In learning preference, we sort of ask questions about how they prefer to demonstrate mastery versus what they're asked to do. And we ask questions about grades and their perception and preference of grades now versus past and the decisions they make around assignments and commitment. While this is not the only way to sort of address the missing data pieces of student engagement, this allows districts to shift the conversation from like who is engaging and who isn't, who is it working for and who it's not, to why it's working for some and why it may not be working for others. And this sort of allows the shift of the ability for, schools, leaders, districts, and even parents and students to be able to have a voice in creating the solutions that are unique to their needs. Now, take some time to reflect against the 7 areas that we shared earlier and start thinking about how you may right now have or do not have data collection or cycles around these points. Start thinking about how you can make a 1% shift as you think about transitioning your data culture to be more holistic to account for the missing data pieces. Thank you so much for watching. As a quick recap, we talked about how missing data pieces can help leaders understand the immunity towards change of a particular challenge. 2, how data should actually go beyond telling us if a student was successful or not, but really uncover the why behind that. So we can start identifying and fighting the data-rich information poor culture. And finally, that there are missing data points in data discussions. So it's really important to elevate those data points around the non-standard demographic, the identity development, the skills acquisition, and the sense of belonging and connectedness. Thank you so much for watching.
Hi everybody, my name is Rani Banjarian and I'm a consultant here at Education Elements. In this video, we're going to talk about user-centered data displays and hopefully get you thinking about how to display and visualize your data with your end user, whether that is your students, your families, or your teachers, in a way that demystifies and democratizes it. As is implied by the title, this video is aligned to the user-centered element in our essential elements of data culture. During my time as an AP Calculus teacher, I always wondered about putting my students' data in front of them. It seemed like everybody around me, including my instructional coach, principal, and other school leadership, kept talking about student data ownership as the holy grail of classroom culture. But as a novice teacher, I balked at the seemingly insurmountable task. It seemed like I was collecting mounds of data every day. Attendance, quizzes, discipline, exit tickets. Too much to even know what to do with. How was I supposed to take all of this data and make meaning of it for myself, much less my students? As educators, we are often faced with the challenge of communicating the wealth of data that we collect every day. How much is too little? How much is too much? In my experience in data visualization, the challenge with centering the user experience is often not which data, but how. Here at EE, we believe in the power of simple displays to communicate the data. But the problem is we often have trouble coming up with the right question to ask and the right story to tell. I want you to close your eyes for a moment and think about all the charts and graphs that you looked at in the past 24 hours. Do you remember any? Did you think any of them were compelling? Did any of them move you in any significant way? Earlier this summer, I remember clicking on the link to the New York Times visual article, How the Virus Won, and I remember being floored. I was speechless at how the article and the visual was able to convey the weight of the story of the pandemic. Now, not every data visualization that we see is going to inspire us dramatically. In fact, most of them will probably not. But what lessons can we learn from the most powerful ones? Failing to put the user first in their interaction with your data display is a disservice not only to your students, families, and teachers, but also to you and the work and the effort that you've put into curating your data. At its core, data visualization is a form of communication, storytelling. When your data display is user-centered, it implies that you understand your audience, you've empathized with them, and you are using the visual to speak about the data in a common language, which everybody will understand. How do we build user-centered displays? First, decide who your user is. Is it a classroom full of 12th graders, or is it 5th graders? Is it the PTA? Is it all of the principals in your district? How visually fluent are they? Once you figure that out, you also want to decide if you're expecting them to explore the data and come up with their own conclusions, or if there's a singular story that you want to highlight. Once you've chosen your audience, think about the point that you're trying to make. Is it to celebrate the average reading growth of all of the students in your class? Or is it to showcase walkthrough data to your instructional coaches and teachers? Let's imagine for a moment that it's the latter. What's the story here? Are you trying to highlight an inconsistency in a particular teaching practice? Or are you trying to just compare walkthrough trends and impressions across grade levels or schools? Once you've chosen your audience and you've articulated the point in the story of your data, spend some time to think about the best visual type that will drive the narrative of your data. If your data is simple enough and the takeaway is simple enough to be displayed in one chart, consider a static chart like a bar graph. If there's two metrics that you want to highlight, or maybe a trend and a metric, consider two concurrent charts, or perhaps a chart and a big number. Or if there are many metrics that you're measuring across different contexts, like for example, across grade levels or across schools, you might consider building a dynamic table with a simple filter feature. In a video about data displays and data visualization, I'd be remiss not to quote Dr. Edward Tufte, the father of modern data visualization, who in his seminal book, The Visual Display of Quantitative Information, said, "Graphical excellence is that which gives to the viewer the greatest number of ideas in the shortest time, with the least ink in the smallest space." In short, the less clutter, the better. Finally, go back to the user context building that you did at the beginning and put yourself in their shoes. Is your data display comprehensible? It's important to calibrate your expectations on what your users will find easy to understand. So in this final step, you might consider testing out the visual with some of your colleagues. Do they read the same story that you're trying to tell? Now here's what I'm going to ask you to do. Think about the most current or relevant data display in your context and consider the following questions. How have you felt successful in ensuring this display is user-centered? And what has been challenging for you in this process? Drop your reflections in the chat. In this video, we talked about user-centered data displays and discussed a framework that you can use to ensure that your displays are user-centered. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Let's talk about what you need to do before you invest another dollar in data. Hi, I'm Freiheit. I'm a partner at Education Elements. In this section, I'm going to talk to you about number one, what the cost of not having a data culture would have on your district. Number two, how do you articulate your why for data? And number 3, what's your strategy for creating your data culture within your district? Today's conversation is going to be centered around the aligned and sustainable elements of the data culture framework with Education Elements. In today's era of unlimited access to information and limitless ways to share information, we see that so many districts are on overload of both of these worlds. When we share a decision or ask for feedback, are we really impressed by the feedback that we get and how it might shape our work? Or are we asking ourselves, is this really up for debate or discussion? We have seen that culturally, information has become a form of power. The desire for power as a leader can oftentimes lead us to hoarding that information versus sharing the information across our stakeholders. According to the Nostr model for managing complex change, we know that a shared vision can lead to confusion. In organizations where there's an aligned data culture, we see that there's a particularly clear purpose for the data and how it guides decisions. Stakeholders are aware of how it's being collected and how it's going to be used. At Education Elements, we'd recommend that if districts want to see authentic data use, then they need to really think about how they're engaging their stakeholders. We'd encourage districts to think about what does a strong data culture look like in a district, and what does strong data culture not look like within a district. This sorting protocol will allow you and your district to start to begin to build your vision for what a data culture looks like within your organization. This vision statement around data should clearly articulate how the contributions of data will impact the work. For instance, one of our districts is collecting data to inform what type of instructional practices are having the highest impact on Tier 1 students, so that their instructional coaches can provide targeted support to teachers. With this district, you're clearly seeing that they're having to articulate on all levels, from the district to the instructional coaches to the teachers, how this work is impacting all levels. Not only that, how they are collecting the information and how that information is going to inform decisions within the organization. You can see from this example how important it is to clearly articulate the roadmap ahead versus creating a manual for your stakeholders within your district. A manual gives you step-by-step directions on how to accomplish something. When we talk about developing a roadmap, we really want to create a space where you're providing guidance, so a direction of where we're going, but understanding that different conditions could arise throughout the experience, and how those different conditions will inform the direction of that roadmap. When we coach our district partners on developing the roadmap, we really want to encourage them to really clearly articulate what milestones should be happening along the way so that they're getting to their desired outcome by the end of it. As a result of this approach, you'll notice that data is used more in a circular way versus a linear way. By identifying the roadmap, we're able to clearly identify what those barriers might be and what information we're using along the way to inform the conversation and the direction we go as an organization. If we think back to the aligned element of the essential elements of data culture, we know that it's important to start with your why. A clear vision on data culture provides a clear roadmap of where you're going and an anchor point in the direction of how to make strategic decisions based on what your organization values. I'm going to challenge you today to think about 2 questions. 1, what is the future data state of your organization, and what will the impact on data have within your district's community? Take a moment to self-reflect. Now that you've had time to self-reflect, I'm going to challenge you to think about 3 different statements using the fill in the blank. To blank, which would be the contribution, so that blank, which would be the impact. Take a moment to write down 3 different statements using that fill in the blank. All right, we're almost there, but in order to create a community of learners, I'm going to challenge each of you now to go ahead and share one of those statements in the YouTube chat channel. The true test is, will this inspire people within and outside the organization? There's no better way than try this out. So I encourage each of you to identify a few stakeholders that you're going to socialize this statement with. Thanks so much for watching. As a quick recap, we started our conversation talking about what the costs of not having a vision for data culture can lead to, and we shared confusion. We then spoke about the opportunity there is to create a clear statement of why you're collecting data in the first place as an organization, and how that vision statement should really guide your decision-making processes as you embark on this journey. This is why alignment is the foundational element for building a strong data culture within your organization. This should be an active process. Data should be used as a way to guide conversation, used more as a roadmap than a manual. Thanks so much for watching. For more content on education elements and learning more about how we're supporting district partners across the nation, I encourage you to follow us on Twitter and check out our website. And most importantly, subscribe to the YouTube channel below.